Hey everybody, welcome back to A Fistful of Cards. It's your best friend Ryan Nash, and we are back at it with the Doomtown Beginner Buyer's Guide, with the third saddlebag, Election Day Slaughter. As a reminder, saddlebags are the smaller expansions of Doomtown Reloaded, with a fairly even mix of the different card types, including a spread between the different types of hearts and spades. Saddlebags also contain 4 copies of every card in them. Election Day Slaughter is an interesting saddlebag to talk about because of the wide differential in the quality of the cards in it. Most of these cards are filler, they're not particularly exciting, but some of them are outstanding, and some of them are, to this day, the best at what they do. Let's get right into it. The first card in this saddlebag is The Brute, a Fearmonger's Dude, an abomination, with a special ability that increases the number of casualties he can cover when you ace him in a shootout. The Brute is an incredibly flexible dude that can slot into all kinds of decks due to his very low cost and not having any influence, so he doesn't have increased out-of-faction upkeep. The Brute is definitely a fine addition to any Fearmonger's deck and many low-value decks in other factions. Smiling Tom is another Fearmonger's abomination, this time a huckster. Smiling Tom's difficult to start due to his high cost and upkeep, but he does make a fine filler dude on Queen if you're playing high-value hexes. He does have a restrictive text that he can only move to a location that has another Fearmonger's dude. The text of the image I'm using does say 4th ring. This card has been errated, and there are promos available with the correct text on them. Something of note is Smiling Tom's Huckster 4 rating, which is incredibly high. Most hucksters, or skilled dudes in general, only have a 0 or 1 rating, and so that 4 can definitely enable you to do some very interesting things if you're so inclined. Our first Law Dogs dude, Philip Swinford, introduces a new mechanic that made its debut in this saddlebag. He's an experienced dude, meaning that he has the same name and is the same character as the existing Philip Swinford, but he has new stats and text. You can have a total of 4 copies of any amount of experienced dudes, so you could play 2 of this Philip and 2 of the previous Philip, 3 and 1, or 4 of one and 0 of the other. They can't be in play at the same time as they do share a name and uniqueness. There are more riders to the experienced rules, but I would recommend looking in the rulebook or the insert that came with Election Day Slaughter for more information. As for Philip, the card itself, his ability is an upgrade on basic Philip, but he does gain an upkeep for your trouble. He does have an extra influence, but in general, this Philip is a very different kind of card than the one from the base set. This is going to be a bit more of an investment due to that upkeep. He's a fine filler dude, and if you're not already playing base Philip, or if you're comfortable with the overlay mechanic and you want to use the experience mechanic to its fullest, he's definitely a decent option. Our second Law Dog is Drew Bowman, a Mad Scientist 1 on 7 value, who can attempt to invent gadgets without booting whenever another player reveals an illegal draw hand and you do not. This makes Drew a very powerful dude, as he can invent more gadgets per turn than other Mad Scientists, provided that your opponent is cheating. He does have a bit of a steep cost, 6 is a lot to ask for 1 grass and 1 influence, but he is upkeep free, so Drew is a welcome addition to the Law Dog stable of Mad Scientists. Continuing into Entrepreneurs, we have another Mad Scientist, Dr. Arden Gilman. His shootout ability is very similar to Soul Blast from the base set, but it does have a rider on it. If, when you make the Mad Scientist skill check, you pull a spade or a joker, Arden suffers the same fate as the opposing dude you're targeting. He's 5 cost 1 upkeep, which is a little much to ask. He's hard to start, but he's definitely a good filler dude if you're playing a mid-value gadgets deck. Our second Entrepreneur is Arvid Mard, who has a lot of big exciting numbers, but is generally not as exciting as he looks. 6 cost 2 upkeep is a lot to ask for a dude that isn't just going to run away with the game. He doesn't have any skills, and his ability only triggers when he enters play. All it does is save you a play to trade a good. 3 stud 2 influence can make a difference in a game, but he's nothing to write home about, and on that 9 value, Arvid doesn't see a whole lot of play. Our first outlaw and second experience character is Allie Hensman. Allie's new ability is that she leads a job that can make your opponent give you Ghost Rock equal to the mark's influence. She does cost 5 and have 2 upkeep, and this is just a radically different dude from the base set Allie Hensman. She fills a completely different role, and is generally just not going to be in the same deck as base set Allie. That ability is deceptively weak. It doesn't always do what you want it to do, and you do have to run a job to accomplish it, which means that it's inherently risky. Our other Outlaws dude, Milt Clemens, is much less risky. As a 2-stud 1 influence for 6/1, he's just slightly more expensive than his stats demand. However, his trait lets you gain Ghost Rock every time his bounty increases. If you're playing any actions or other dudes that can increase bounty, or even some of the Outlaws' outfits, which can increase bounty, Milt can more than pay for himself. He's definitely a dude you'll want to build around, but he also can make a good filler on 8 if you're playing that in Outlaws. And here we have, without a doubt, the most influential card in this set, and I mean that in more than one sense. Jake Smiley doesn't have any printed influence, but he does have 2 influence during the Sundown phase, which means he can take control of deeds when determining victory, and his influence counts against your opponent's victory condition. For functionally 2 cost for 2 influence, Jake is one of the most efficient dudes in the game. His ace value and brass bullet are definitely downsides, but Jake is more than enough bang for your buck. Until very recently in the game's life, there were few reasons to not play Jake in your starting gang. If your collection's still fairly limited, he is always a welcome sight to add a little more influence to a lacking starting gang. Our other neutral dude is a gadget dude. This is a new mechanic introduced in Election Day Slaughter. Quaterman must be invented, and he enters play at the Mad Scientist location instead of your home, though that can be your home if your Mad Scientist invents him at home. Quaterman's bullets cannot be modified except by attached goods, and cards cannot move or boot Quaterman. Note that this means your cards as well. Quaterman cannot move or boot to pay costs, so he can't do things like lead a lot of jobs, boot for Pistol Whip, things like that. He also can't be sent home or booted by your opponent's cards, but it's a bit of a double-edged trait. He's very cheap at 1 cost, but that 1 upkeep adds up if you're playing a lot of them. Quaterman is an interesting card, but not necessarily the most effective. Our third neutral dude is Angela Payne, who at 7 cost is quite expensive, but she doesn't have upkeep and is a stud with influence, so Angela can find a home in decks with good economies. She does also generate Ghost Rock with her ability. If she's at a deed you do not own, you can boot her to gain 2 Ghost Rock. This is dicey, as she will then be at your opponent's deed, booted, and can get called out. But if you're willing to stand and fight for it, Angela can be a very powerful dude. Alternately, if you have movement tricks and ways to get her out of that situation, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with Angela. Moving into deeds, we have the Mayor's Office on Ace. 4 cost 2 production for 2 control points is a big swingy play, but definitely a bit of an investment. The ability to raise or lower the influence of a dude at this or an adjacent location can definitely win or lose games. This is a pretty scary deed to play, if only because your opponent can take control of it, and then they can use this deed to make it more difficult to take it back from them. However, due to Ace's lack of options in deeds, the Mayor's Office is one of the better choices on that value. On 7, we have Hunter Protections, no control points, 4 cost 1 production. Boot your dude without a control point at this location to raise their bounty by 2, and they get a permanent control point. This plays very nicely with a lot of themes. This is a win condition on its own. If your opponent gives you the time and space to keep moving dudes onto Hunter Protections and giving them control points without punishing you for it, Hunter Protections can definitely run away with games. Permanent control points are always something to watch, and the ability to raise bounty without getting into shootouts can be very powerful, especially in conjunction with a lot of Outlaws cards like Milt Clemens we saw earlier. In Hearts, we have the Evidence, a goods which is once again oriented around bounty. As a noon action, you can reduce a wanted dude's bounty by discarding it, or you can raise a dude's bounty by acing the card and paying an additional Ghost Rock. The Evidence can be a good option for decks that need ways to get rid of bounty on their own guys. If you're afraid of Law Dogs, this can definitely be a good tool in your kit. It's also useful for decks that want to put bounty on dudes, but don't have any other inherent way to do so. However, it's less effective in that role due to the acing effect on the raising bounty ability. Next up, we have Teleportation Device, an experimental improvement gadget on 10. It allows you to move your dudes from the location of the teleportation device to any other location. However, you have to make a pull, and if you pull a club, you discard the dude instead. This can be incredibly dangerous and is difficult to build around. A lot of these experimental cards have very powerful effects, but pulling clubs tends to have really strong downsides, and this is no exception. Once again, I'm going to say that experimental is generally not worth building around, but if you want to do it, Teleportation Device is a good option. Our final good of the set, Mayfair Family Deck, is a King mystical good that gives the attached dude Huckster 0, meaning that they can attach and cast hexes. If they lose the Mayfair Family Deck, they do discard all hexes from the dude. This can let you do a lot of really interesting things, playing Hucksters out of factions that don't necessarily support them, or adding the ability to have more Hucksters in play to decks that already do that. Speaking of hexes, our first spell is Puppet on 4. Puppet's a noon action where you pull against the grit of a dude at this location. If you succeed, take control of the dude until after the sundown phase. Puppet is incredibly powerful, but also very difficult to make work. It does cost 2 Ghost Rock, and it has a very low value, which means that it's hard to play with other hexes, especially if you want to guarantee that all your pulls are going to work. Puppet can run away with games, or do absolutely nothing, and there's not really a lot of in between. It's a very swingy card, but definitely one to watch out for. The second hex in this saddlebag is Summoning. Noon Hex 5, lead a job marking the town square. If the job succeeds, play an abomination from your hand, reducing its cost by 6 Ghost Rock. That abomination gains a control point permanently. Summoning does cost 2 up front, so you'll definitely have to use it to get that money back. But it is a win condition. It lets you put control points on your abominations, it puts more dudes into play. The downside being that you have to run a job with your Huckster in it. This is another card that is very powerful in the right circumstances, but is sometimes completely useless just due to not being able to take the risk to run a job marking town square. Definitely something to look at if you want to play Huckster Abominations. A final note on Summoning, its lower value does mean that it's difficult to play with a lot of the base set hexes like Blood Curse. The first action in this saddlebag is Ridden Down. Boot your horse to send a dude without a horse at this location home booted as a noon action. Ridden Down is a very powerful control tool and really opens up a lot of options for horse decks. You can combine this with Run 'em Down and Rope and Ride to have a really strong grasp on what your opponent's options are and to really dictate where they can go and what they can do. However, it does not work on dudes with horses, so keep an eye out if your playgroup tends to play a lot of them. The next action, Tail Between Your Legs, is a 9 with a react ability. After your callout is accepted, the mark must form their posse before you form yours. The mark gets -2 bullets until the end of the shootout. This is potentially very powerful because it forces your opponent to decide how much they want to commit to defending their dude before seeing what you have arrayed against them. That -2 bullets can also be very useful against single strong shooters, where your opponent would accept a callout, banking on that dude being able to defend themselves and win the shootout. It can definitely do a lot of interesting things, but once again, that 9 value isn't doing it any favors. Note that this does not work on jobs. Speaking of jobs, the last card in this saddlebag is the titular Election Day Slaughter. Noon job boot, mark the town square. Each other player may unboot a dude in town. If successful, each other player must ace one of their dudes in town for 1 ghost rock. Election Day Slaughter is another removal job along the vein of ambush or kidnapping, but less targeted. The upside of Election Day Slaughter is that your dudes will be able to join it from anywhere in town, because it marks the town square instead of a specific dude. The downside is that each other player may unboot one of their dudes to attempt to defend themselves, and that same town square adjacency benefits other players. However, being able to potentially ace a dude for 1 ghost rock and a job is very powerful, and that king value means that it plays very well with a lot of skill decks or other high value structures. For this set's deck list, I've made a Morgan Cattle Company horse deck using 2 copies of the base set and Election Day Slaughter. This deck takes advantage of horses and horse cards to safely use the Morgan Cattle Company outfit ability and then put the pressure on your opponent and start calling their dudes out, booting them home, and generally just controlling the board and dictating the pace of the game once you get set up. There's a link in the description to this deck list on the Doomtown database. And that wraps up Election Day Slaughter. I would say this set is not a very high priority outside of the handful of really useful cards that are in it. Jake Smiley, Election Day Slaughter, and the Brute will probably see the most play out of this expansion. And you can get promos of Jake Smiley. Those were available through the Organized Play Kit, and you can find them from some single stores. Other than that, it has a variety of really niche options for specific decks, so if you like to play bounty-based outlaws, if you like to play horses, and if you like to play hex control, there are some options here, but there are other sets that do those things better. So I would say hold off on this one until you're ready to finish out your collection, unless you really need those Jakes or another specific card in here. As always, if you liked the video, leave us a thumbs up. If you hated it, leave us a thumbs down. Either way, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time with our first Pine Box Extra Large expansion, Faith and Fear.